Well, welcome everyone. I think that you are all, I hope you'll agree at the end that you'll have been privileged to attend a panel on what could be the most pressing issue facing higher education. Certainly underappreciated one, but we hope to illuminate the issue over the course of the next hour. I'm joined by four distinguished panelists. I'll describe them as a truth teller with his finger on the pulse of what's happening in the market, and then three experts who will help us understand what options these distressed colleges actually have for working out of their current situations. But I'll let each of our panelists introduce themselves, and then we'll kick off. Michael?
Michael Horowitz, president of TCS Education System. We're the community solution in higher education, a nonprofit system of today 5 colleges that advance student success and community impact. Great to be with you.
Great. Perfect. Chris Good. I work for RBC Capital Markets, which is the investment banking arm of the Royal Bank of Canada. I'm in their public sector investment banking practice. That generally focuses on nonprofit higher education institutions, to a certain extent for-profits, and then increasingly bond funds which hold the debt of nonprofit higher organization institutions.
Sabrina Chancellor of Fremont College. I came here when I was in college and didn't speak any English from Korea, so I studied computer science and started teaching computers to fashion designers, and that became Art Institute of Hollywood. After I sold it to EDMC, I went back to school and was doing my doctorate dissertation and figured that really the innovation in higher education is the most pressing issue in America, and how I could contribute back to the community. So I bought Fremont College as a laboratory for my doctorate dissertation, and it's easy to be a chancellor when you buy the college.
The most expensive doctoral dissertation in the history
of
American higher education.
Doctorate dissertation.
Very good.
Mark?
I'm Mark DeFusco, and I'm from USC. But I have a very strange background in the industry. I started, it seems like forever ago, early on in the Apollo Group when Apollo first went public, so it was very exciting years. After that, I was the CEO of a private equity held group in the Midwest that did very well. After that, I went and worked on Wall Street as an investment banker for Berkeley Noyes. And over the last few years now, I've been doing some work consulting with colleges about options on how to consider their assets if there's some trouble. So thank you for inviting me. You were expecting Pat, and
You could be Pat, too.
I could be Pat from Saturday Night Live, but thank you. Really.
No, I was going to say that we invited actually a trustee from one of these troubled colleges to join us. Unfortunately, I have to take our word for it. With that, let me just start with Chris, if I may. So, when I was describing this panel to colleagues, I was saying, come learn about the hundreds, if not more, traditional colleges, troubled traditional colleges that will soon be owned by their bondholders. How big a problem are we talking about? Is it literally hundreds of colleges that will be going through this process?
It's a good question, right? And so maybe before we go down to quantifying exactly the number of distressed higher education institutions there are, might be worth sort of qualifying what we mean by distressed.
Great.
So on one level, if you're a distressed institution, very literally you have borrowed money in the tax-exempt bond market to fund capital expenditure on your campus, and you're no longer able to pay the principal and interest on that debt. So you've entered into either some form of a forbearance agreement with your bondholders by which they are asking you to restructure or turn around the institution, or the bondholders have directed you to literally shut your doors and sell your assets. That would be one category, and I think we'd look at that as being very deeply distressed. That's a small number, right? I think that ranges in the 10 to 20 institutions that fall into that category. If you expanded it a little bit more broadly and you took a look at institutions whose capital stack is no longer able to be covered by virtue of the enrollment revenue that's generated from students coming to a campus, that expands. So there are a large number of institutions which just don't have enough students enrolling to be able to continue to service the debt, but they're at the point where they're making hard decisions around what they fund on their campus, but still with the idea of being able to preserve the capital stack that they have. And I think the third area, which might be a broader ring, is institutions which have woken up to the fact that they're having a tough time getting kids to attend because they're no longer delivering on their mission, and are looking to identify a different direction within which to go. And I would say that that is probably, of the 3,400 higher education institutions that we have, that may be the broadest sort of bottom third of the market that's trying to figure out what to do next. Does that
Right.
answer?
So you've got 10 to 20 in the first bucket, second bucket maybe 100 or 200, third bucket is 3,400 institutions.
And migration down that curve.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting. And help us understand, is this a phenomenon that's specific to private institutions, or are there some state institutions as well that fall into this category?
If you've taken a look at what's taking place in the state of Illinois right now with regard to their system of higher education, right, and taking a look at where institutions are no longer receiving state funding, sort of two very different worlds, right? For smaller mission-driven nonprofits or for private institutions, largely enrollment-driven, no endowment resources, very limited alumni or donor base, right? Those on the private side, I think, definitely fall into this category. There's still, based on state funding, albeit though state funding has declined historically year over year for smaller state institutions, level 2, level 3 within the state, there's still an implicit guarantee that the state will back the obligations of the institution and prevent them from defaulting. I think that what you're seeing on the state level is more of a question of, do we need to have 10 institutions of higher education funded by the state, or do we need to consolidate and make that 8, make it 7, make it 6?
But in terms of institutions literally falling into the hands of, or at risk of falling into the hands of bondholders, we're talking about small private institutions.
I would typify as, being private institutions.
That's great. And is there some way to put a number for the journalists in the room who know a good story when they see one?
I wouldn't,
in terms of the total size of the debt that is the bonds that are at risk here?
Well, I think you could say that, roughly speaking, the amount of debt that is outstanding for higher education institutions, right, the amount that they borrow each year, it's typically about a $26 billion market of new borrowing. That's up year over year. If you were taking a look in 1980, it would have been maybe a third to a quarter of that. So the amount of borrowing that institutions is doing has grown over time. You could attribute that to everything from presidential aspirations. If the best way for you to look good to a board is to put a new building on your campus and to put a donor's name on the front of it, you may not be thinking about the right way to pay for that building over its life, or even thinking about the depreciation expense, the deferred maintenance that building will incur. So in terms of new issuance, that's probably the right way to go to it. I'm not going to put a number on exactly how broad the figure is of distressed debt, but
fair enough.
Substantial.
And the last final question before we open it up. So who's buying this debt? And are they, are these bonds being rated properly, fairly? How did we get to this position? Are bond buyers and holders simply ignoring the trends in higher education?
Right. I wouldn't say that that's the case, right? I think that there's sort of an idea that we're living in kind of like a Big Short type scenario, or a Big Short world where there's a bubble in higher education that could burst. The people that are in the bond funds are very smart. For the most part, these are tax-exempt bonds, right? So it's the sort of asset that's invested in someone's retirement fund, pension funds for teachers, that sort of thing. So there certainly is like a broad applicability and acceptance of tax-exempt debt as an investment tool. Are the bonds properly rated? I think the rating agencies do a good job of assessing where risk is, right? So it's not as though there's a rating agency concern or a failure to identify where the trouble is. I think everyone is sort of aware that the trouble is happening. Where the risk is when you find out that you're in trouble, what is it that you can do and where can you go? And we seem to be long on problem and short on solution to a certain extent. I think that probably clarifies where we're standing right now.
Right, and I think we're going to start talking about solutions. And so to get there, be helpful if, there was the first media report, I think just last month, on, I think, the first college to sort of work through this process, certainly that you've been involved with, which is Dowling College,
right,
on Long Island. So talk a little bit about that. That's a college in that first tier, right? Literally, unable to pay the principal and interest.
And we're a little bit limited due to confidentiality about where they're at, although we've been successful in identifying an affiliation partner for them, right? I think that the best way to describe this would be if you're an institution and you're looking to try to figure out what it is that you can do. You have income statement solutions and you have balance sheet solutions, right? So from a balance sheet side, it's can we reduce the debt either through negotiating with a bondholder to take a write down in the value of the bonds that they're holding, or do we have some form of asset that we can monetize, liquidate, right, and use to pay back bonds that are outstanding? The idea of asset monetization isn't something in any way that's restricted to the bottom component of higher education. It's actually right now a very popular strategy for institutions to look at monetizing existing assets. Some high-profile examples: Ohio State University, monetized their parking infrastructure on campus. They're now in a process where they're doing the same thing with their on-campus power plant. University of Oklahoma did a similar structure. So, the idea that there are assets that you own that are non-core to your academic mission. You're in a lot of different businesses. If you're the CFO of a higher education institution, do you need to be running, a hotel, an energy plant, and a parking garage? Maybe there are people that are better suited to do it, right? So from a balance sheet perspective, it's can we negotiate the debt? Can we sell it, right? For an income statement side, the easiest thing to do if you're a small institution is to look at how you can drive up your enrollment, right? There was an interesting article about this in the New York Times yesterday in terms of, can we hire an enrollment management company to help us drop more students on campus? And while that might be helpful in the short term, it raises longer term questions around how well do those students adapt? Are they accepted into the academic community?
I think that was an article about how they're exploitative marketing of international.
So sometimes it doesn't work all that well, right? So, ideally, you're looking at a balance sheet solution and an income statement solution paired together. And then the third thing, if you can find it, is something that would help the educational institution innovate their way out of the problem, right? Or literally think about delivering their education in a different way. And I think the easiest thing people would look at would say, well, we could do it online, right? That's sort of the easy answer.
That's what we're going to
get to. Maybe think about here.
I guess what I want to say, the situation at Dowling. I know you can only say so much, but describe if you can this slow motion car crash over the last few years, and then we're going to have our panelists sort of weigh in on sort of how they think it might have evolved. Let's speculate a little bit, just based on our experience.
Right, and again, because we're a little bit limited in terms of what we can discuss, but what's out there, at least in the public domain, right? So an institution that, very similar to a lot of small private colleges, it's a phenomenon that's not unknown, right, has seen year-over-year enrollment declines. It's become more difficult to attract students given the educational offering or the educational portfolio that the school offers. The underlying demographics of the area within which it sat have been challenged in terms of graduating high school students. I think that's one of the issues that they face. Again, that's not uncommon sort of across the board for small private institutions. A limited endowment that took a hit during the recession. So if you were looking to be able to draw from your endowment and the value of the endowment has gone down, that's no longer really available to you for recourse. And so it ended up in a tough spot. And again, not necessarily through any fault of their own, just sort of through larger forces that have kind of conspired to push institutions down this path. Sweetbriar is another good example of something like this that might be worth talking about as well, too.
Absolutely. So Mark, you were nodding, and I know you've had lots of interactions with troubled schools over the years. So help us sort of paint the picture, if you will, of what might have happened at Dowling. Where was the board? Where was the leadership of the institution?
It's a great question.
We know that the trustee is not here with us on this panel today.
Yes, I'm not a trustee. But the question is, where were the trustees? And I think the difficulty of many of these smaller colleges who are potentially troubled is a difficulty of governance. And part of that has to do with how do you form your boards if you're a small private college. Most of the time, the boards are it's a fundraising function. And so for your $50,000 donation, you get a board seat and you get to go to homecoming and mingle with the car dealers and the attorneys in town. And so there's not really a governance function like you would see, for instance, some of the boards that you may sit on in these for-profit colleges. Largely, they don't have that kind of fiduciary responsibility. And so by the time that things get into the first level of Chris's problems, that they're in trouble, they can't make their payments, the board oftentimes is not even aware of that, and now they're shocked. So my first guess is that the boards just don't see their function as a fiduciary, and that lots of presidents do a fairly good job of hiding. With due respect, I have great admiration for a college president. It's a terrible job to juggle the responsibilities between the responsibilities to the faculty senate and your responsibility to go out and do some fundraising and trying to manage all these competing roles. But there's really two kinds of presidents. There's a president who is very ambitious and is at a top 500 school and wants to now be hired at a top 400 school. And in essence, what they do is they make decisions that are good for their own career, but not necessarily good for the institution. Then there's the second kinds of president who are just hanging on to retirement. And so I'm just going to try to hang on until I'm old enough to retire and let the next guy settle it. And so by the time that the next guy gets in, the first 6 months are very, very enlightening because they don't know that there's been 10 years of deferred maintenance. They don't know that the solutions that the last president used to hide the problems from the board now come face forward.
Right,
so
right.
I think
a bracing dose of cynicism from our panelists. Sabrina, as a college president, do you agree? Is that possible?
I think there's a big difference between for-profit and nonprofit governance. For-profit sector has the freedom and agility and also the responsibility to shareholders to really face the problems almost right away, where the nonprofit sectors have somewhat of a possibility to defer some of the decision-making process. So for example, if Dowling had enrollment decline from 2,500 to 1,000 students, if it was a for-profit, there will be an emergency break. But there are a lot of great nonprofit governance that act and run like a for-profit institution with real good financial and physical responsibility, and that is a forefront. But a lot of smaller liberal arts institutions, presidents' backgrounds are mostly academic backgrounds, and they've never ran a real business. So financial statements are not really the forefront of their daily process, and it's a difficult process to look at it. And if you don't have a board who can really see what the problems are, it will be very difficult to identify what the problems are.
So when I think of nonprofit schools that run like an efficient business, I think of
Absolutely.
TCS and
Michael has done a very good
Horowitz.
job.
So
Of course.
give us your perspective.
Yeah, so I can speak to that bigger group, maybe the pre-distressed group, because TCS Education System is completely nonprofit. The last 2 years, all of our colleges are growing year over year in enrollments. Great comments by everybody. I can build on that, including our law school. Everyone says you don't need more lawyers. In fact, you need more lawyers who are willing to work in public interest law. So if you keep tuition down, you focus on that market, you focus on community, you actually can produce lawyers who get
You
employed.
also need more lawyers to sue the law schools.
I won't touch that one.
Yeah.
Mark and Sabrina's comments are spot on. It starts with good governance, which is something that we bring to our colleges. Today we have 5 colleges, and we absolutely think that here's the red line. Every nonprofit college needs to run what we call a surplus, and in for-profit you call profit.
Yeah.
If a board sees that you don't have surplus year over year, you are, if not distressed, pre-distressed. We're also sitting here in San Diego, which is the home of the other and first nonprofit higher ed system, National University System, that again rose from a couple hundred students to a powerhouse, tens of thousands of students. We started with 200 students in 2000 and today have over 7,000 students. We built our assets all in nonprofit from essentially 0 to 100 million. If you run a surplus year over year, you reinvest it, you run it like a business, you're going to do okay. The trick for small and medium-sized colleges is they have to find partners and get together. It can be all in the non-profit space. And the other insight I would share is today especially, you have to be hooked in some ways to these major urban corridors. If you're in a small town, find a partner that's in a bigger city that's going to hook you in.
That's great.
Online is part of it, but it also is becoming part of the broader economy.
So I guess one question for Chris. Yeah. Those are great comments. One question for Chris. I assume there are schools that aren't running surpluses that are issuing bonds year in, year out.
Right, and is that viewed as problematic? Right, I think that's a fair question. So, and it's interesting just hearing some of the commentary, from Mark and from some of the other panelists. Right, I think it's easy in some ways to jump on the bandwagon and say that higher education institutions are suffering a failure of leadership. Right, and the board is someone that likes to come in for maybe homecoming. Right. They like to have a name on the side of a building, and really that's the extent of their fiduciary responsibility. And I think that when you contrast nonprofits and for-profits, really the difference is in the name, right? So if you're a for-profit institution, you have a fairly easy benchmark to be able to ascertain whether or not you're successful. Are you profitable, right? If you're a nonprofit, your first dedication is to the mission of the institution, right? And the mission of the institution might be educating as many people as possible, right, at a low cost to them personally. So I think it's very easy to say, for example, look, I'm selling my tuition at a certain level and I'm discounting by 50%. Well, you're giving away half of your potential product. Well, if the mission of the institution is to get people that can't pay in, then they should be discounting the sticker price. I think the challenge is, if you're a nonprofit, you do have a fiduciary duty to continue the mission of the institution more than you have perhaps just to the mission itself, right? So do you have the fiduciary responsibility? Do you have the ability to make sure that the school continues financially? Those two things can sometimes become confused. But to answer your question, operating deficits in and of themselves are not necessarily viewed as being a bad thing by the rating agencies if there is a good reason for running operating deficits. And there's some very high-profile institutions that choose to do this.
Aren't we back in the mortgage crisis? Aren't these
Yeah,
bondholders just aiding and abetting
Yeah.
these schools
Well,
and the poor governance that's occurring?
There may be a way that banks and bondholders look at it as someone that's led troubled colleges out of trouble. There's absolutely no reason to run operating deficits, especially when running a nonprofit. You're putting at risk that very mission. So I agree with you.
Right.
You don't have to keep growing the margin. You don't have to get investors. You don't have to double your growth rate. But if you can't eke out 2, 3, 4, 5%, and again, nonprofits don't pay taxes. You suck at 5%, and actually, the best money, of course, is donated money, but that has to be sort of the cherry on top. And you only get donors if you're running a good business as a nonprofit, because donors never want to give money to colleges.
Yeah, it's a helpful point.
But Ryan, I think you should take a look at why initially people are making that loan. Right. And I think part of that has to do with the nature of the demographic. For many of these small colleges, their usual customers are not there anymore. So that we had a really high number of co-eds, 18 to 25-year-old students going into colleges around 2008, and then it dropped like crazy. And a lot of these schools never anticipated that, so they started to get a real crunch in competition. Their solution, however, was an interesting one, because what they did was they started building more amenities, because they thought, well, if I build a better cafeteria, or if I build the climbing wall, the kids are going to come here. They're going to make a $250,000 decision on the climbing wall, and so they didn't buy bonds that were going to generate capital. They were buying bonds simply to capture the disappearing marketplace. And so I think that's the problem that Chris is directing at. If you make a loan and that loan's going to pay you back somehow in revenues, well, that's all right. That's what makes wealth. But if you're making a loan simply to make sure that you're not going to lose the customers that you had before, well, then you run into problems down the line when you have to pay the piper.
Yeah, climbing walls don't work. Lazy rivers, though, those are the thing.
I think the college facilities are really one of the biggest brain damage of the traditional universities. If you look at the way the college universities have been built and how it was really issued by the bond. Bloomberg has rated $40 billion of the junk bond of all the college bonds. And it's also, the second thing to really think about is all the policy changes, right? In 2007, there was an income-based repayment program. 2012, there was a pay program, which was the pay-as-you-earn program. So, if you bought the bond when the interest rate was 4% and the interest rate goes up to 20% because of the policy change, the bond rating will change. So I'm not really sure if that bond rating is really reflecting all the recent changes of the student loan repayment plans.
So yeah, and I think it's important to differentiate here. We're talking about two different things, right? So there's a very separate and very important conversation which is taking place around student loans and how people are able to fund their college education, how those interest rates are set, right? For the most part, that is separate and distinct from what higher education institutions are doing, right? Higher education institutions, for the most part, are borrowing 30 years at a fixed rate, right, for a capital asset which the bondholder has a pledge to be able to take back a mortgage, right, if you will, on that asset at the end of the day. So building a real asset, which is being constructed with bond proceeds, is very different from depending on tuition revenue, right, to be able to fund necessarily the growth of, right, just the maintenance of that asset. But I take your point. I think there's a real issue right now, and maybe for the enrollment-driven smaller colleges, the problem is people are looking and saying that the trade-off of having a degree from a 4-year institution, right, which maybe has levered itself up in terms of borrowing to amenify the campus, so tuition is high, isn't necessarily worth what it costs you to go as a student.
Right.
And that is driving down the number of people that enroll.
So Chris,
And also the demographics have changed drastically if you think about it, from Gen X, which was about 50 million people, to millennials have gone to 80 million. And now, Gen Z is just shrinking, drastically to, they're predicting about 30 to 40 billion, a million people, sorry. Got the B's and M's confused. But, if you look at the number of customers in the marketplace, these small universities and colleges will be really in a bigger trouble, especially if they don't have the niche market that they could.
I agree with that. I'm not worried about the number of customers. I think there are plenty, and it's growing, and especially when we look globally, universities have to have something specific and concrete that they're offering, and it's gotten too diluted.
absolutely. So I'm going to have Chris set the scene again, and then we're going to have our experts advise. So the bondholders from Dowling contact you, they bring you in, and you then are charged with coming up with solutions that will keep the bondholders from literally having to seize the assets that they ultimately.
Sure, and so to avoid again talking about Dowling, which is at least partly confidential and proprietary at this point, let's just say that if you were to step on up and if you were to work with you're working with a college, right, which has debt which is outstanding. They're cut off from capital markets access to be able to refinance that debt, amend the terms of that debt. And they're trying to figure out what it is that they can do to innovate their way out of the problem that they're in. So how do we deliver a better educational promise, maybe leverage our assets in a unique and interesting way, right? And is there a way to grow enrollment? That would be the problem that you would be facing.
But this is not just simply, maybe you want to take these people advice. You're in a situation where you are, in a sense, directing the leadership of the school, or perhaps even taking over the leadership of the school.
Bondholders actually don't have that right. So that's a little bit different, right? The bondholders at no point, based on bond documents, can actually take over a college. They can't direct the college to liquidate. They actually can't force the college into bankruptcy, which is one of the significant issues I think that you run into. So colleges can't declare bankruptcy. If they declare bankruptcy, they lose access to Title IV funding, which basically means you can no longer afford, or you can't enroll students, right? So, from the college's perspective, it's, we can't file for bankruptcy to sort of resort our assets. What is it that we're able to do? And what we would do, I guess what RBC would work to do, would be to come up with alternatives that the board could choose from that would help them evolve and move out of the situation that they're in currently.
So curtain number 1, curtain number 2, curtain number 3. So unveil curtain number 1 for us. What set, if you were brought into a troubled institution, what sort of set of
if it's that far gone, you need RBC.
Right.
Going higher up, I would say this. Get out of all these peripheral businesses the colleges are in. One of them being real estate. So across our 5 colleges in our system, we own some real estate, but very little. Try and sell your real estate assets or deploy them in some other way.
They may already be encumbered, though, by these bonds. So
they may be encumbered.
Yeah.
So then, I'm not troubled by this common phrase about enrollment driven. I think for the most part, colleges should be enrollment driven. That's the core of the business, and focus on the programs that are exciting to the public. Cut off the programs, hard business decisions to cut off the programs, the products that aren't working, and focus on your core. I will tell you that in addition to having the benefit of scale when colleges come together, there is something that is not as quantifiable. Our retention is variable, but it runs, let's say, 70, 80, 90% depending on the program. We decided we wanted to improve it. We're able to bring together faculty and leaders across the colleges to work on those issues within the community without going to a conference, paying consultants. So there's great benefit in working on these issues together, and too many colleges have been cut off from the outside world.
That's great. Sabrina, what are the options that these colleges face?
Just a few different buckets. The first one is what we talked about. If you are just focusing on 18-year-olds, that market is very, very shrinking, because now the 18-year-olds are the sons and daughters of the Gen X, which was much, much smaller generation than millennials. And I don't know why people don't think about the demographics. Demography always, that math always works. And we had a really good economy because of the millennials. That market is going to shrink. What Michael has done is really brilliant, and a lot of people have done the same. You increase that market size by going into adult education, non-traditional students. So you don't just train 18-year-olds as your main market, as a traditional university has done. You go through from 18 to 60-year-olds and really look at each generation of what their needs are, what their core competencies are, and build programs according to that. The second part is, if you look at staffing agencies, they make a 15 to 20% EBITDA. So why wouldn't universities act like staffing agencies? Go to the employer, have a partnership, get the jobs that they need, whether it's 200 people or 100 people from Microsoft or even Walmart, then recruit students according to what that employer's needs are, and then train them according to that employer. And I think that employer partnership and universities, rather than acting like an academic institution, acting like a staffing agency, would be a really good way to get out of the problem, because you're naturally supposed to make a 15 to 20% EBITDA on it.
So a supply chain theory of workforce development.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, one way to do it. And the third part is, a lot of universities decided to be a traditional university of jack of all trades with all of the programs. I would find one or two very, very good silos that you have the best, professors and best people within the market, especially if you're local and you're not online. You just have no choice but to be a niche market and really adhere to the community needs rather than just going as broad as possible. One other is, I know this is probably have tomatoes on my face, but faculty tenure and being a research university, if you're a troubled institution, you can't afford it. I think adjunct professors who are practitioners, who are just very driven by mission of the institution and want to contribute back to the university, I think those are really good professors to hire. The tenure professors would be the good leaders who can really hold the academic integrity, but actual teaching can come from the practitioners, or they can co-teach the courses.
Chris, did Dowling do anything with tenure, or can you not say anything about that?
I, again, couldn't really speak specifically about Dowling, but what I'll say is I think that there, so, if you look at the way in which students are educated, right, and I think this is true pretty much across the spectrum, although I don't have perfect knowledge around this, right, there's been a shift towards the use of adjunct faculty, and the reason why there's been a shift towards the use of adjunct faculty is, for the most part, they cost less. It's very difficult to do things with tenure because of the academic protections that exist around the faculty as a body. And it's also very difficult to do things with tenure just politically as an institution, because if you're a president, you come on in, you start talking about tenure, removing tenure, modifying the tenure track process, right? Not only might you run into trouble with your accreditor, but you also probably have a vote of no confidence from your faculty senate, and now you're looking for another job, right? So it's very difficult to modify the tenure structure as it currently stands. But what schools have tried to do to shift out of it is to focus more on adjunct faculty and practitioners as educators.
I have a comment on the adjunct faculty, which is a bit of a funny term when you're working with adult students and practitioners. You made a great point, Sabrina. So we employ a lot of full-time faculty. They're fabulous. They do uphold the integrity and advance the institution. We teach people to be nurses, psychologists, lawyers, teachers. To not have practicing faculty who are employed in their fields would be a big educational mistake. and we pursue long-term relationships with them, so that it's not the picture of the adjunct who's running around to 6 colleges teaching intro to English. And I think that's somehow gotten all merged under this term adjunct, and I like the idea of clinical faculty, practitioner faculty.
Yeah.
In fact, in traditional universities, it's how the programs have gotten so cut off from what's actually going on in the legal, the education, the healthcare community by not using more of those faculty.
That's great. Before we turn to Mark, let me just say on Sabrina, so a couple of your suggestions were connect better with the workforce, right, with employers, specialize, shrink if necessary. That's the former is a challenge if you're Sweetbriar, right, and you're in a rural location. The latter is a challenge if you have $50 million in bonds outstanding, you need to make the payments, and how can you give up revenue? Sometimes even if it's unprofitable or unsurplusable revenue. Right. Mark, you want to help us out?
Yeah, it's a very, very difficult question, largely because by the time you get into this circumstance, Ryan, you don't have the resources to get yourself out of it. And so by the time it gets to Chris's level 1, those 10, 12 folks, those solutions are very, very difficult because you're going to just need to be bailed out. Somebody's going to have to write a check. But let me see if I can put it in a different way in terms of looking at it globally first and then trying to squeeze. If you look at 3,500 private institutions in the United States that the Department of Education allows us to collect financial aid, there's probably about 300 that are worth talking about. That they have a name brand, you know what it means when you say the name of the college. And the other 3,200 are pretty much generic. They all teach about the same things. They all do about the same things. You can't tell a psychology program at one small school from another small school. And so the question then becomes, if you have to increase your revenues, how do you do it if you can't distinguish yourself from somebody else? And so I like your notion of trying to make sure that you distinguish yourself. The difficulty with many colleges is they don't know what their strength is. And so they take their very limited marketing dollars and spread it across a whole range of things and never really identify the 1 or 2 things that could really distinguish themselves. So I think that outside help is absolutely necessary, and I think, one, it'll give you the discipline, because I think part of this is really just discipline, that you have to answer questions about the viability of your mission. And then the second thing is that you really don't have access to any other capital. If you can't borrow, you can't go back to the well and ask your donors, because the donors are a little upset, especially with restricted endowment. Why did I give money to somebody and then tell me that you were in trouble? So the capital resources are very, very difficult. So my guess is that the best way to do it is to partner with somebody who does have an expertise, and you own a couple of them. So I think that's the only way to do that. But make sure you don't wait too long, because if you wait too long, then you don't have any answers.
So when I pitched this panel to Deborah Quazzo, she said, what does that have to do with innovation? And I said, well, maybe, I thought for a second, and I said, well, maybe this coming wave of distressed traditional colleges will accelerate a wave of innovation of colleges, traditional colleges that just have no choice but to innovate. So I'm hoping someone on the panel will agree with that statement.
I do agree with that. When I was leading a somewhat distressed college in the 2000s, we partnered with an online service provider to get into online. Absolutely was the only way we could enter that market. Over 10 years, we learned a lot about that space. And so we have well over 1,000 students that study online today, and we've taken it all in-house, which maybe isn't a great message to companies here. Although now that we have so many online programs, we're in a position again to say we probably can't resource all of them, and we may be out there looking again for outside partners. So, and
I knew I invited you for a reason.
Yeah, and bringing online absolutely transformed the way faculty thought about their teaching. It actually excited them, and building the back office on behalf of 5 colleges has really allowed our faculty and academic leaders to focus much more on what they're good at. So I think it can be.
Okay, Chris?
Yeah.
No, I mean, I agree with it. I think it's the premise of the panel, and it's a great premise altogether, right? So, we can step on it and we can do something that puts a Band-Aid on a problem, right? We can fix a balance sheet. We can come up with a way to drive up enrollment, maybe temporarily. But what a school really needs to do is they need to shift almost the culture and the focus of the institution, right? It's very difficult to do that if you don't have alignment among your stakeholders. And one of the easiest ways to get alignment among your stakeholders is to have a crisis where someone else is telling you, you have to get your house in order, right? So, that's at a point where you do have full dialogue between the faculty senate, the board of trustees, the administration of the college, the alumni, right, which are sort of the 4 different constituent groups you need to have to say, look, it's not enough that we had a great school 100 years ago. We need to come up with what a great school looks like 100 years in the future. And the question is, how do we take what were our strengths for the past 100 years and leverage them to ensure that we have another 100 years of successful innovation in education? That's the challenge. And if we can do that, I think we'll go a long way towards
hopefully no schools are issuing debt to create crises from which opportunity.
But necessity is really the mother of invention, right? So if you think about how traditional universities have been designed, is 120 units in 4 years. And you talk about unbundling the program. Why not make all these unbundled so that each courses can be delivered just in time, depending on the life of a student? So for example, if an 18-year-old really needs to go to school for 4 years because that person needs to grow up, 35-year-old may only need 2 or 3 courses to enhance and get the right job. So come up with different programs, vertically design the curriculum so that it's not a 4 years, but first year will have different student learning outcome, get a certificate. Second year, you can get an associate degree when you finish it, but you come back with a different student learning outcome, and then go to work. You don't have to finish 4-year college in 4 years or 6 years while going to frat parties. You can finish the school in 10 years by working the 6 years out of the 4 years. And then that education has actually become an applied education because you went to work. And I didn't finish my undergrad because I had to work. We didn't have money. So I started a business. After I sold the business, I went back to work. I went back to school. And when I was sitting in the classroom, everything made so much more sense to me because I just did not understand it in my undergrad because I didn't have the work experience. And I think if we all act like a grad school MBA program that requires students to have 1 or 2 years of work experience and kind of unbundle the entire 4 years, these schools can actually get out of a lot of the innovation, problems through these innovation. Another thing really quick to talk about schools with all these different programs. If you have a niche market and have no facility to maintain with about 200 students, a single location, single program, you can be profitable. And it's like, it may be a shock to a lot of people.
Right.
But it's like 150 to 200 is where the break-even point. You need infrastructure, you have fixed costs as a university, but with a single program, single location, you can actually break even at 150 and still be profitable at 200 students. So don't be a buffet house, be a spaghetti house, and make the best spaghetti possible. I think that's exactly what a lot of universities, especially the small universities who are in really financial trouble, needs to do.
Right, but again, it's hard to make spaghetti when you have $50 million of bonds outstanding.
That's the truth.
But that's kind of the problem. You need to rethink as to how to get out of this water so you can really reinvent and restart.
That's great. Mark?
I think you may have...
Mark, what sort of innovations have you seen? So you've had lots of interactions with troubled colleges. What sorts of innovations have you seen?
I'm not certain that you're going to get innovation. I hope we can. I think what we've seen in the past is when you had one troubled college, they would call their friends. They call folks that they know, and they would get bailed out by another troubled college, and it's kind of the lifeboat. I have a leaky lifeboat, and I'm just going to call somebody else who's also got a leaky lifeboat, and it becomes more dangerous. So I'm a little nervous about that. I'm hoping, however, that colleges begin to see that it's kind of the last bastion of our world that hasn't changed very much. There's still kind of this strange cyclicality that small private presidents hold their breath every August to see if they're going to make. And so can you imagine, if you're a college president and you don't know if that last 100 students is going to make a difference or whether I can pay my coupon this year, then you don't really get the pressure points. And the last thing I talked to Chris about last night is that you don't really feel the pain until this time of year, right? Because even if you're down 20%, you get paid up front. So you really have you have a load of cash. And it's not until March, April, May that you begin to realize, oh, geez, I'm not going to make this. And by that time, that discomfort gives you too much fear to really do much innovation. So I'm hoping that you're correct.
There's any innovation that's happening right now.
That's correct.
Right here on this panel. Okay.
Thank you.
So back to my Dowling obsession. I'm sorry, Chris.
Sorry.
So it was announced that there is an academic affiliation agreement in the offing. What is an academic affiliation agreement? And we can have Michael follow up on that.
So, again, without speaking specifically about Dowling, but what I would say, I think one of the things that's important for any institution that is in a situation like this is finding a partner that actually understands and respects the type of institution that you are, right? The type of institution that you're aspiring to be. But the first and foremost, they're an academic partner. And I mean, academics matter to academics, right? It's not enough to just bring to the table a capital solution, right? You have to find someone that is similarly mission-driven, similarly purpose-driven, right? That's aspiring to, maybe in their own way, try to work to reshape education. And so you find a partner that can help you envision and work towards what a new solution might look like. And it's pretty nebulous and doesn't really tell you anything, right?
But essentially, the hypothetical college's balance sheet becomes the responsibility of the academic affiliation partner.
I think that the key component there is that you need to find someone. It's not just enough to be able to go and step forward and say, look, we have capital, we're here to step into your problem, we'll buy the assets, we'll buy out the bondholders, so on and so forth. It's not just a balance sheet solution or an income statement solution. It needs to be a mission-based solution, and it needs to be with institutions or with parties that really do understand something about educating people and working to educate people in different ways. Does that help?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's spot on. You need, the academic mission has to be at the center, and you have to have like-minded institutions. So over our 6-year history, we've probably talked to over 50 colleges and universities. They're very interested in our centralized services and scale. We only affiliate with colleges that educate 35-year-old women for the most part and are oriented toward professions in their community. But there's plenty of opportunity for liberal arts colleges and religious colleges to partner, and it's going to make that academic synergy much more valuable. We're trying to move in the direction, Sabrina, that you talked about unbundling and offering courses across the system. One opportunity for technology companies, in my view, the technology behind the scenes, student information systems, that makes that kind of unbundling easy is fairly primitive, and we need to advance that side of the house.
Right. What kind of academic affiliation partner would want to take on a small rural liberal arts college?
Well, I just came from the governing board conference in D.C. and heard about Urbana College in rural Ohio that is now connected with Franklin College in Columbus. So I think it sounded like a very good move. Like they sort of moved toward a bigger community, and the college that took them over, like the programs that they have. So I think it's again coming back to governance and being willing to look out there and explore not obvious options.
Ryan, I think one issue that investors or folks who are thinking of being an academic partner ought to think about is the regulatory issues as well, because I think the regulatory bodies don't quite get it. And so if an academic partner is going to make an investment, change of control policies, at least as it stands right now, I'm going to defer to my friend Mike Goldstein, but the change of control doesn't allow the academic partners to do very much the first year or two. And so my recommendation to anybody who's considering being an academic partner is before you come to the finish line, you get into the pipeline the things that you think need to be done before you get this transaction, because it's not going to happen after the transaction. And then hopefully folks like Mike and his friends are able to discuss this with regulatory bodies. If you want to save failing institutions, you better let them do something about it.
But to your first point about boards, a lot of affiliations that have made sense get blown up at the last minute by boards that don't want to cede independence. And I've seen situations with universities on the same stretch of land in a city. The merger made complete sense. They can't find a way to do it. The next thing, they're borrowing money to build a new building.
So, I think my last question here is, when does this tap get shut off? You know, when do these bondholders, bond buyers, begin to price this risk properly with these small colleges? I mean, if I'm buying a bond of a small liberal arts college, I would expect a 8, 9, 10% coupon, and right now I think they're paying what, 4?
Yeah. So I mean, maybe two different ways to answer the question, right? So the first is the bond market adequately pricing the risk of a security that's being offered by a small liberal arts college? And I think that you would say that the credit spreads that are being charged on that type of offering, especially in the lower investment grade space, have definitely increased, and they're sort of commensurate with the risk that's outstanding. There's a second component of this, which is there an awareness on the part of the bondholder about what mechanically could cause them to have to shut down a college? So literally, what would need to unfold where the school were no longer able to pay them back? What do those trigger events look like? And I think there's a greater knowledge and a greater understanding around what those things actually look like. So if you are on some form of watch from your accreditor, that is now something that bondholders are considering and are very much attuned to, right? They understand what the regulatory process is, what the accreditor has the ability to do in terms of forcing you to show cause or withdrawing your accreditation, eliminating your ability to teach students. There's more of an awareness of that. So I think it's sort of, there's what you're paying, right, and then there's what the creditors are looking to understand as far as what could force an exit or what could actually force a closure.
So the ambassador from Wall Street tells us the market is working.
Yeah, sure.
Sort of.
Amen.
Thanks.
Surprise, surprise. Well, I think we're out of time, but thank you very much to all our panelists. I've learned a lot.
Thank you.